Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, there is a lot of talk and indeed excitement about vaccines at the moment. But for me, the big hero here is the technology and how it has united many nations to work together on a solution. And when I found myself wanting to learn more about this world, I came across Belfast-based Peter Keeling, who is the CEO and founder of Diaceutics, originator of the world's first diagnostic network for precision medicine. And having floated on the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange last year, Diaceutics is firmly committed to addressing the most pronounced issues that are hindering the traditional cancer testing landscape. And I think this is so important because I think for the past 12 months, we've all been heavily focused on COVID and the global pandemic. But what about the testing of other life-threatening illnesses throughout this time? And what can be done to improve that? And what role will technology play in that? So I wanted to learn more about the challenges in that area and the role that technology is playing in changing the narrative. Because ultimately, better testing equals better treatment. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Belfast so we can speak with Peter about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Indeed. Thank you, Neil. My name is Peter Keeling, and I am Chief Executive Officer of a company called Diaceutics. Diaceutics is a global company focused on what I call the diagnostic ecosystem. We primarily today work with the pharmaceutical industry and laboratories across the globe to try and improve the way that patients are getting access to the right drug. I'm sure we'll talk about how we do that in a second, but in essence, there's a range of new smart drugs coming to the market which only work in certain patient types. And to find those patients, you have to test them. And so Diaceutics has stepped in to really help the industry, laboratories, pharma, and others identify very quickly how and where to get those patients tested correctly.
And I am looking forward to diving into that subject a little bit deeper with you in a few moments. But one of the big passions of mine on this podcast is learning a little bit more about the story behind a guest. So I've got to ask, where did your passion for making a difference in healthcare and technology come from? Can you remember that moment and how those two worlds collided for you?
I very much do. I think I've been fortunate. A quick thumbnail of my story. So I was born and educated in Belfast. And when I left university, like so many, no doubt, of your listeners, I had really no idea what I was going to do. And I, after a short sojourn working in a diagnostics company here in Belfast, I was fortunate to land myself a job with a company called Wellcome Foundation, which is now part of GlaxoSmithKline. And for my sins, rather than give me a car and have me driving around the UK as some sort of rep, they said, we're going to ship you off to Egypt. And I spent the first 4 years of my experience working out of Cairo and its surrounds, supporting what, at the very early stages of my career was kind of liaising back with the London office and making sure that our business there, our pharmaceutical business, was going well. I think one of the characteristics of that early experience was an emerging understanding of how healthcare ecosystems work or do not work. As you would imagine, being Egypt, there was a lot of difficulty in getting patients to the right drug and drug to the right patients in terms of payment, in terms of education, etc. So I suppose my initial experience was very much shaped by working in a dysfunctional healthcare environment. I went from Egypt to Indonesia, another 4 years broadly where it's a bigger market, and significantly bigger market, 350 million people, as broad as North America. And we're doing something very similar at this time on a kind of a bigger canvas. And all the way along, I think I was really not just appreciating the job of running a pharmaceutical business, but really starting to understand where patient care was being let down, and where the issues were. And it intrigued me sufficiently that I applied for a visiting fellowship at MIT, and after a couple of other kind of roles within GlaxoSmithKline, found myself back at the age of 35 as a student, sitting alongside technology entrepreneurs in the Sloan School in Cambridge, in Boston. And when that happens to you, a couple of things are going on. I at that stage, I think, understood the pharmaceutical business. I understood healthcare. But I was really intrigued by these people, mostly younger than myself, who were really out to change the world. They thought on a bigger canvas. And I think there were days when I was sitting in lecture theatres or sitting in intellectual conversations and thinking, boy, I have lost it here. I'm so far behind the curve. But actually what emerged from that exercise at MIT was a kind of a curiosity about where was the big play in the future of healthcare? Where were there areas where transformative change could take place? And that opened up for me, I think, the question and the fascination that diagnostics really were an area where there was huge untapped understanding and untapped value. And the famous phrase, I think, is pretty well known in the industry, that diagnostics generally control 70% of all healthcare decisions, but they take 3% of the healthcare dollars.
Yeah.
And to me, back to my comment about Egypt and Indonesia, where I was living and working in broken ecosystems, this immediately struck me as a broken ecosystem. And that really began a journey towards what was the right business model to, I suppose, disrupt this space.
Love that. And you did mention there about the feeling of cancer care being let down. And this year, of course, there's been a tremendous focus on COVID-19, and life-threatening illnesses such as cancer and identifying illnesses such as cancer have almost, for want of a better phrase, taken a back seat. So I've got to ask, what are the most pronounced issues hindering the traditional cancer testing landscape at the moment?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've been fortunate to do in Diaceutics, we're 15 years in business, and for the last 10 of those years, we have been amassing what I would describe as a real-world view of patient testing at kind of a 10-feet view. You're using data coming from testing laboratories directly and insurance companies, and we're analyzing that data to get a really good understanding of how really do these patients travel on what I describe as their diagnostic journey. So let me take lung cancer for an example. Yeah. Today, we've over 11 million patients in our lung cancer data set. And, many of those patients, if not most of those patients, can travel up to 4 to 4.5 years from cough to getting the right targeted and precision medicine drug. So it's 4.5 years when their disease has been kind of progressing at a disease level, but they have gone through maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 different testing events, from initial lung cancer function through X-rays, through eventually into molecular testing. And that kind of real world understanding of those testing journeys allows us to ask a series of questions of ourselves as, why is it taking 4.5 years? What are the barriers? And why can we not have these patients travel that journey in 4 months, not 4.5 years? Now, we'll come back to that in a second, I'm sure. But in essence, it starts with what's really happening on the ground. And a lot of what we've been doing with our pharmaceutical clients and indeed with our labs is revealing what to most, I think, and to the globe is a realization that these patient journeys are protracted and they are kind of full of issues and missed opportunities to test those patients. And no doubt every one of your listeners will know someone who has traveled that journey or is traveling that journey, to which the word like biopsy conjures up such terrible images in their mind. So we do not manage those diagnostic pathways, in my view, in the way that we can. Now let's come and talk a little bit about COVID.
Yeah.
So COVID has kind of done two things in a way, both juxtaposed each other. The first thing, of course, is so many patients who otherwise would have been presenting to hospital or to their healthcare practitioner to start that journey have stayed away. The kind of classic physician-patient interaction, the rhythm by which we all lead our lives, was severely disrupted through April, May, June, and July last year. And again, using our data, we actually know what the quantum of impact that was. And up to 20 to 30% of cancer diagnostic, of patients who would be otherwise diagnosed with cancer, stayed away. Now, of course, those patients haven't gone away, nor has their disease. So one of the things that we need to think about here is how and where are those patients going to come back into the system? How do we find them? How do we bring them back into the system? And indeed, does the cancer testing bandwidth, and every healthcare area has a bandwidth, it has a capacity. So does the future testing bandwidth have an ability to manage that, we feel will be a surge of patients coming back into the clinic as we move through vaccinations and into a more normalized society? So the first thing is, I believe that there is what we call internally in Diaceutics is COVID's cancer chain reaction, which is going to impact us through 2021 and beyond. And others like Lancet and the American Cancer Association are projecting that this will have a 4 to 5 year impact on cancer outcomes. On the flip side of that, and one of the things that we've noticed is I think the world has woken up to the understanding of testing. And whilst that might start at the breakfast table with why can't we all go down to the supermarket and get a COVID test, I think there's a growing realization that testing in general is the first line of defense in disease. It's the first line of defense in COVID. It's also the first line of defense in terms of cancer. And I think one of the benefits, if I could think of it that way, coming out of COVID is, and its application to cancers, I think there will be a better realization that whilst the world is primarily focused on new cancer treatments, we need to focus our eyes back on how do we get these patients tested better, smarter, earlier, so that they get onto the right drugs quickly.
And do you think that we understand the scale of how the pandemic has impacted cancer testing yet? Or do you think there's still a lot that we're going to learn?
Well, yes, I think this is still an unfolding situation. Yeah. And again, the clinical evidence done by those scientists at the front line are, asking a question: Does a cancer patient who then goes on to have a COVID diagnosis, so they're suffering from COVID as well, does that create what are called disease sequelae? Are there kind of synergies between those two things which will accelerate the deterioration of that patient? Now, we don't know the answer to that, but I think the general feeling is that we need to be alerted now and early towards those types of patients, that subset of patients. And when you look at the daily numbers, I mean, here we are, beginning of December 2020, and we're looking at 150, 160,000 new infections every night in the United States, and similar numbers across Europe. When you look at those types of population level impact of COVID, of course, we're going to see a significant impact on those cancer patients in terms of those cross infections. So what are the new test panels that we need to put in place to support those patients? Should we be looking for other things alongside the cancer to make sure that we're out in front of that? Or the flip side of that is there something about following those particular patients which allows us to identify new treatment options which are currently not imagined? Can we use the testing data to identify those patients and that have had COVID test plus cancer diagnosis and identify and treat them in a different way. So lots to learn here. And I think particularly that, as I said, that chain reaction is something that I think will unfold over the next 24 months.
And one of the things that put you on my radar was at Diaceutics. DXRX is described as the world's first diagnostic network for precision medicine. And as this is a tech podcast, can you tell the listeners a little bit more about how you're using technology within this network?
Yes, absolutely. So if I maybe just take a step back on that, Neil. So when you think of the word dia and ceutics stuck together, I think it speaks to our two worlds colliding, diagnostics and pharmaceutics coming together into an integrated approach to managing that. And underpinning our belief at Diaceutics is that if you improve the way patients are being tested, you will improve the way they're treated, which creates our moniker at the bottom of our name, which is better testing equals better treatment. So how does DXRX, the platform, fall into that? Well, first of all, DX is the industry abbreviation for diagnostics. RX is the industry abbreviation for treatment. So yet again, bringing this into the platform play, we see a world here which needs to converge. We need to see a convergence between pharmaceutical companies who are endeavoring to launch these drugs to make sure that that testing ecosystem is not creating any barriers to those drugs. We have laboratories who are endeavoring to make sure that patients are tested the right way and communicating to their physicians as to what that answer is as quickly as possible. Turnaround times of 2 days and 3 days are good. Turnaround times of 30 days and 45 days in cancer are not good. And within that, you equally have other, what I would call critical stakeholders, people who are a part of that diagnostic ecosystem, maybe not evident to the everyday person, but who are just as important in the functioning of that diagnostic ecosystem, many of which we've begun to bring partnerships into the platform. So from a technology standpoint, in essence, DXRX is a platform, a bit like an Uber or an Airbnb. It's conceived as a marketplace which says, you know what, in order to solve the broken diagnostic ecosystem that I spoke of earlier, we can either have one of two things. We can have Diaceutics continuing its kind of lonely journey to reveal to the world why this is important, or we can open this up to market forces and invite those who we believe have an important interest, important role in creating a functioning marketplace, a place where testing is adopted much more quickly, a place where the gaps and the issues and the hurdles are well understood because of the real world data. In its first manifestation, DXRX, which launched a couple of months ago, built on many, many years of preparing to bring a healthcare platform. Healthcare platforms are not built overnight, as you would imagine. But what we've in essence done is introduce all of our data, over 300 million patients worth of data. We've brought that onto the platform to allow all those stakeholders to see what we see, which is the opportunities that are resident in that pathway. Secondly, what we've done is to invite our pharma clients, or all of the laboratories that we've been working with over the years. It's over 2,500 laboratories that conduct about 60% of cancer testing. We've identified those. We're inviting them all onto the platform. We're also inviting partners and people who have a critical role in providing unique and boutique services within that diagnostic marketplace. And by bringing them together and forming collaborations, so we're driving those collaborations. That collaboration might be to launch one new diagnostic much more quickly. Another collaboration might be to improve the quality of testing of a diagnostic that's been out in the marketplace for 5 years. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we are taking an integrated and collaborative approach to that. And the platform is there to enable that ambitious, but nonetheless kind of that dynamism that needs to take place. When you go back to my examples of Uber and Airbnb, at their basic heart, they're bringing groups that were otherwise siloed into a place, allowing them to function and work together. That's exactly what we're doing with DXRX.
And before you came on the podcast, I did do a little bit of research on you guys and came across some shocking stats. One in particular was that 10% of patients receive non-small cell lung cancer treatment without relevant testing. Is that right?
That is right. Sadly, again, I'm back to the data. When we started Diaceutics 15 years ago, we and our pharmaceutical clients spent a lot of time hypothesizing about things that might be wrong. We had a kind of anecdotal evidence that patients weren't being tested the right way, but there was very little hard evidence. By building up the kind of global repository of data, we are now being able to illuminate and shine a spotlight on practices which nobody wants. Nobody wants. The one that you mentioned, which is for these new targeted drugs, which are highly dependent, if not totally dependent, on patients being tested. 10% of those prescriptions are being given without the test. But actually, there are even more shocking numbers underneath that, and that is when you look at the quality of testing and the variability, if you like, of testing across the globe. So lung cancer is one disease. It affects patients similarly in all the markets. But the way that testing is managed differs between lab to lab. And when you look at that at a population level, what we see is that 20 to 30% of the test answers are not right. Now, that's nobody's individual person's fault or individual lab's fault. It's a function of how this kind of diagnostic ecosystem is working or not working, from sample management to turnaround time to poor reimbursement. All of that creates a dysfunction, denying 20 to 30% of patients to get the right treatment. So if I can just summarize two things. One, patients are not getting access to these tests and drugs for a long time, even though they're out in the marketplace. Two, when they do get them, 20 to 30% are getting the wrong answer. And on top of that, there's another group, the 10% that you mentioned, aren't being tested at all, but are going on drug. Now, that's broken.
Wow. And I'm curious, are there any other insights from research published by Diaceutics recently that you think would be of particular interest for people listening to?
Yes, I think we spend a long time. I almost feel like we try and bring too broad insights to this diagnostic opportunity. The first is at the patient level, and so we have a report that we publish every 18 months or so, which we call the Pharma Readiness Report. Now, that sounds very lofty. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to shine a light on what exactly is really happening here. The most recent one, which we published a few months ago, focused specifically on lung cancer. And we brought everybody's eyes down to the 10 feet level and saying, is this right? Is this the right way in which we're trying to unlock the value of better testing for patients? So that report, which is available from our website, Pharma Readiness Report 2020, I think makes for intriguing reading, because we're looking right across the function or dysfunction of that marketplace in one disease area, but it's representative of multiple disease areas. And the other kind of lens that we like to bring is what I would describe as the economic lens. I'm hopefully making the case, a cogent case, that better testing will improve patient outcomes. I think there's lots of evidence for that. But actually, better testing will equal better healthcare economics as well. There are lots of winners here. And part of driving a business model in healthcare is to try and find those winners and bring them together so that economically they reinvest their dollars in the right place. So very simply, if you think of the winners in the diagnostic marketplace from better testing, well, the pharmaceutical industry, for a start, they will get more patients onto the right drug quickly. That's good for them. There's diagnostic companies who will make sure that their tests are sold and used much more quickly than they currently are. The laboratories who are working on such small margins, they are the front line of patient management here, and they're working on such small margins that even the decision to add a new technology support to a lab on a Monday morning is a decision that they might agonize over for a month. Yet that new technician might accelerate the way in which a diagnostic cancer test, accelerated from being a 5-day turnaround time to a 3-day turnaround time. And for us, making sure that those laboratories are given their rightful place in a diagnostic marketplace and redistribute some of the wealth that is being created elsewhere into their hands, in our view, can only be a good thing. Again, there are others in that loop, I believe, that economically are advantaged. Payers who may be paying for drugs that patients haven't been adequately tested on, or they're paying for testing which itself is not necessarily giving the right answer. So part of our analysis and our data is, on the one hand, it's what's happening at a disease level. On the other hand, it's what's happening at a macroeconomic level. And if we can bring the global realization that better testing equals better treatment, but it also equals better healthcare outcomes economically and from a health practice standpoint, then we will have won.
And I think I should also highlight that Diaceutics recently won a European International Award for publicly listed companies. So can you tell me more about that report and what this achievement essentially represents for you and the team?
Yes, indeed. One of the unusual things about Diaceutics, normally when you start a tech company in healthcare, you go through a kind of the usual funding round. You use your founders and friends' money to get you off the ground. You use venture capital. You might bring in some private equity, and maybe in the end you would go to a listed market. We, like so many things at Diaceutics, we didn't go that route. We started with obviously an investment by a small core of founders who put their sweat equity and their own dollars back in to building a real proper disruptive model within healthcare. And although we have been funded through bank funding along the way, our first real external equity came from a listing on the London Stock Exchange at the AIM market back in April 2019. What many kind of saw as the kind of the ultimate step, we saw as our second step. Now, I think what has happened subsequently to that, first of all, we were able to bring on board a number of investors whom I believe totally understand the technology advantages of bringing a disruptive technology into a space like this. And they've been hugely supportive to us in providing not just one, but subsequent funding rounds to drive our business model forward. They get the opportunity here to really transform this diagnostic space. And we've been hugely supported by that. But the second is that I think the combination of mission of mission plus kind of progress along the way that we have made has brought us to the attention of a broader audience, one of which is the kind of the European theatre, where they're looking across multiple IPOs that are going on all the time in a given year. And they're saying, which of these speak to the types of qualities and values that we believe public funding is aimed at. Another aspect of Diaceutics that we've highlighted along the way is our culture. And our culture inside the company, I'll be the first to admit, was a kind of an accidental consequence of bringing together inside one company people who worked in labs, worked in the front line of healthcare, who worked in the finance industries, who worked in the pharmaceutical industries, who worked in data. And bringing that group together and allowing them to refocus their eyes on making sure that we can remove these barriers to patient testing and ultimately to drugs. And that kind of culture inside our organization really drives a kind of a sense of purpose. And I believe what's happened here is that the International Award for publicly listed companies has looked at us from a financial standpoint, has looked at us from how we've leveraged public funding, and ultimately how we brought and held on to what I believe is a really cool business culture driving us forward. And I think they've recognized that, and obviously hugely grateful for that and other accolades that I think we're winning along the way.
And I would suspect that a lot of your success will be determined by the kind of partnerships that you have. So I appreciate you might be locked down to NDAs and can't reveal too much, but are there any big partnerships to date that you can share with us?
Yeah, I think, look, I think it's no secret over the past 15 years, we've been working alongside leading pharmaceutical companies, those top 30 pharma who have been investing heavily in precision medicine. I think of them as partners because ultimately, whilst we're supporting them, they equally are supporting us in taking on significant diagnostic challenges. But as we've moved into the kind of the era of the platform, where we've brought all of the ecosystem together, as I've described earlier, what we're doing now is forming partnerships with those groups that we believe will have a disproportionate impact on improving the functioning of that marketplace. And those to the world might seem small, elegant boutique players. To us, we feel that they fill essential parts of the jigsaw. So companies like Targos, which is a pathology training house, an internationally globally recognized pathology training house based out of Germany, Histosite in the UK, which again has a global partnership, a global client base in supporting laboratories. Alva10, a Boston-based team who are really much focused on unlocking the financial and economic value within the diagnostic pathway. These are partnerships that are very relevant to functioning testing. And more recently, we've formed some partnerships with CPQA, which is the Canadian kind of quality assurance group for laboratories, and UK-based EMQN. I always get those around the wrong way. Who again focused on helping us raise the kind of standard and the quality of testing with labs, in partnership with labs, and there are groups who are professionals at that. Now, our partnerships will continue here. Again, when you think of marketplaces and platforms, they're all about bringing the right people together into the room at the same time. And we're starting that journey. We're funding that journey. We're really proud that these groups who have been functioning within diagnostics, sometimes some of them for many, many more years than Diaceutics, have put their faith and trust in us to say, okay, let's put all this together. Let's collaborate and create the change rather than to run in the individual silos that we have. So I think watch this space. I think this is the beginning of partnerships, which in our view will drive the marketplace.
And as we prepare to enter 2021, which sounds a little bit crazy even saying that out loud, what's next for Diaceutics? What's going to be your big focus next year?
Well, I think in many ways having the last couple of months really brought and launched the platform itself, a product of several years of engineering focus in the background. I think the next year is about bringing more partnerships onto that platform. We're launching a series of collaborations, which in many ways are examples of how we feel the marketplace can function better. Again, we're encouraged to see that when we do something and show the evidence that it works, both our pharmaceutical clients and our laboratory partners come on board and say, well, let's do more of this. So we are launching a series of those collaborations to demonstrate that we can tackle some of these global issues. I mean, after all, on one level, we're an Irish-based company with global ambitions. How are we going to manifestly change a diagnostic marketplace? It starts with these collaborations. So I think next year we will continue to launch those global collaborations. We will publish them. We publish the impact of those collaborations, and hopefully, as we come out the end of 2021, where the greater part of the world has been vaccinated, and we're all hopefully enjoying more of a normal life. That what we will have managed to do in the next 12 months is to prove to the world this last piece of the jigsaw for me, which is if you look at a space like cancer testing, and it's not exclusive to cancer testing, but if you look like a place like cancer testing, if we get this combination of collaboration and partnerships right, if we inform them with the right intelligence and smart thinking, what you can do is you can transform patients' lives really quickly. And I look forward to, I think through 2021, is seeing those collaborations bear the fruit to put, in my view, what has been a 15-year journey in its 16th year, actually prove the point that better testing does equal better treatment.
It has been an incredible journey you're on there. And we've covered a lot of ground today. But for anyone listening that would love to find out more information, find you guys online, or even contact a member of your team if they've got any questions, what's the best way of doing that?
It's very easy, Neil, and that is www.diaceutics.com. And there's lots of ways you will find us there. There's lots of portals, I think, into our hearts. So, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. As I said, I'll repeat it. This world will not be fixed by Diaceutics. We can enable and integrate a lot of collaboration, but it requires others to stick their hands up and saying, we want in. So please come and join us.
Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And yes, Diaceutics is a data analytics and end-to-end service provider enabled by DXRX. But ultimately, all that is built on just believing that every patient should get the treatment that they deserve. So I love everything that you stand for here. I'd love to stay in touch with you and follow your journey next year. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing that with me today.
Thanks, Neil, for giving me the opportunity.
At Diaceutics, they simply believe that every patient should get the precision medicine that they deserve. And for me, it's a great example of moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to medicine. And I loved hearing more about that incredible journey that Peter's been on there and Diaceutics, and how they've worked on every precision medicine brought to market and provide services to 36 of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies. So kudos to the team for leveraging technology to make a difference, for building the world's largest repository of diagnostic testing data with a growing network of something like, I think it's 2,500 labs in 51 countries. But I am a tech guy outside of the medical and healthcare industry. So any questions, insights, experiences, comments, or if you want to come on the show, whatever it is, remember, just email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My Twitter is @NeilCHughes. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. I always love to hear from each and every one of you and get your voice heard too. That's why I created this podcast, to create a platform for everyone. But we're out of time, I'm afraid, so I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. I look forward to your emails and messages and DMs. So all that's left for me to say is thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.